The Dore Lectures on Mental Science. By Thomas Troward. Lecture 5. Alpha and Omega. Part 2 of 2. This, by the laws of mind, is the nature of the process, and it shows us what St. Paul means when he speaks of Christ being formed in us. Galatians, verse 4, chapter 19. And what in another place he calls being renewed in knowledge after the image of him that created us. Colossians verse 3, chapter 10. It is a thoroughly logical sequence of cause and effect, and what we require is to see more clearly the law of this sequence and use it intelligently. That is why St. Paul says it is being renewed in knowledge. It is a new knowledge, the recognition of principles which we had not previously apprehended. Now the fact which, in our past experience, we have not grasped is that the human mind forms a new point of departure for the work of the creative spirit, and in proportion as we see this more and more clearly, the more we shall find ourselves entering into a new order of life in which we become less and less subject to the old limitations. This is not a reward arbitrarily bestowed upon us for holding dogmatically to certain mere verbal statements, but it is the natural result of understanding the supreme law of our own being. On its own plane it is as purely scientific as the law of chemical reaction, only here we are not dealing with the interaction of secondary causes but with the self-originating action of spirit. Hence a new force has to be taken into account which does not occur in physical science, the power of feeling. Thought creates form, but it is feeling that gives vitality to thought. Thought without feeling may be constructive as in some great engineering work, but it can never be creative as in the work of the artist or musician, and that which originates within itself a new order of causation is, so far as all pre-existing forms are concerned, a creation ex nihilo, and is therefore thought expressive of feeling. It is this indissoluble union of thought and feeling that distinguishes creative thought from merely analytical thought and places it in a different category, and therefore if we are to afford a new starting point for carrying on the work of creation it must be by assimilating the feeling of the originating spirit as part and parcel of its thought. It is that entering into the mind of the spirit of which now the images in the mind of the spirit must necessarily be generic. The reason for this is that by its very nature the principle of life must be prolific, that is, tending to multiplicity, and therefore the original thought image must be fundamental to whole races, and not exclusive to particular individuals. Consequently the images in the mind of the spirit must be absolute types of the true essentials of the perfect development of the race, just what Plato meant by archetypal ideas. This is the perfect subsistence of the thing in the thought. Therefore it is that our evolution as centers of creative activity, the exponents of new laws, and through them of new conditions, depends on our realizing in the divine mind the archetype of mental perfection, at once as thought and feeling. But when we find all this in the divine mind, do we not meet with an infinite and glorious personality? There is nothing lacking of all that we can understand by personality, excepting outward form, and since the very essence of telepathy is that it dispenses with the physical presence, we find ourselves in a position of interior communion with a personality at once divine and human. This is that personality of the Spirit which St. John saw in the apocalyptic vision, and which by the very conditions of the case is the Alpha and Omega of humanity. But, as I have said, it is simply generic in itself, and it becomes active and specific only by a purely personal relation to the individual. But once more we must realize that nothing can take place except according to law, and therefore this specific relation is nothing arbitrary, but arises out of the generic law applied under specific conditions. And since what makes a law generic is precisely the fact that it does not supply the specific conditions, it follows that the conditions for the specializing of the law must be provided by the individual. Then it is that his recognition of the originating creative movement, as arising from combined thought and feeling, becomes a practical working asset. He realizes that there is a heart and mind of the spirit reciprocal to his own heart and mind, that he is not dealing with a filmy abstraction, nor yet with a mere mathematical sequence, but with something that is pulsating with a life as warm and vivid and full of interest as his own, nay, more so, for it is the infinite of all that he himself is. And his recognition goes even further than this, for since this specialization can only take place through the individual himself, it logically follows that the life, which he thus specializes, become his own life. Quod the individual it does not know itself apart from him. But this self-recognition through the individual cannot in any way change the inherent nature of the creative spirit, and therefore to the extent to which the individual perceives its identification with himself, he places himself under its guidance, and so he becomes one of those who are led by the Spirit. Thus he begins to find the alpha and omega of the divine ideal reproduced in himself, in a very small degree at present, but containing the principle of perpetual growth into an infinite expansion of which we can as yet form no conception. St. John sums up the whole of this position in his memorable words, "Beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be, but we know that when he shall appear, that is, become clear to us, we shall be like him, for, that is, the reason of all this, we shall see him as he is." John chapter 1 verse 3.2. Lecture 5. Alpha and Omega. End of lecture. Need help understanding Troward's teachings? The Thomas Troward lectures contain very deep and powerful information, but to get the most out of them, require repeated listening and in-depth study. Troward had only one personal student, Genevieve Behrend, and her book Your Invisible Power distills the essence of Troward's lectures in a concise and easy-to-understand format. For many, this is a much preferred way to learn Troward's teachings. Click the link below this video to visit yourinvisiblepower.us and learn more about Genevieve Behrend's recently updated book.
Click the link in the description below for a chance to win 10 classic best-selling Law of Attraction books.